What's up, you lot? I hope you had a good weekend. I thoroughly enjoyed my day yesterday commentating on qualifying and free practice 3 alongside Jolyon Palmer and Jenny Gow, of course, who was in the pit lane in Barcelona. Jolyon Palmer, by the way, has turned into what I think is an absolute natural commentator. He's very, very good at what he does, and it was a real pleasure to be sat alongside him commentating on that. I enjoyed qualifying, although Mercedes utterly dominated it and blew the competition out the water. I thoroughly enjoyed myself. Shouts to anybody who was listening, and lots of you have been in touch to say you were listening and enjoyed it, so thank you. That was cool. But it was a real insight into the dominance, the absolute dominance around that circuit of Mercedes, and a real sign of how far things have changed since we were there just 10, 11 weeks ago for pre-season testing. Ominous, really, the signs that were on display there. And I don't really think it's just about Mercedes taking giant leaps forward. It's almost as much about Ferrari taking giant leaps backwards. Ferrari are backing their way into the pack or being caught by the chasing pack, and Mercedes are just edging further and further away. So ominous signs for the rest of the season, but as ever, loads to talk about. There's still plenty of questions that need answering, as there are at every single Grand Prix, and lots of those questions have come my way from you lot. So let's get into some of them now. Right, well, let's start with this one, which comes in from Glenn Robertson, who asks about the Barcelona circuit, and a couple of questions around this. But first of all, Glenn says, Aloha, Mark. He says, now that we're back at Barca, I was wondering if there's any reason testing takes place there rather than another circuit on the calendar, or one that isn't even on the calendar. Well, if testing continues to be in Barcelona, as we now know, that could well be that it is a circuit that won't be on the calendar next year. It could be the last time we end up racing at Barcelona for a while. A little birdie tells me that there could well be a big announcement on Tuesday, so tomorrow morning by the time you see this, from Zandvoort about them potentially signing their contract. So we'll wait and see if that comes to bear. But to answer your question, the reason we go to Barcelona is kind of a traditional thing. We've been going there for a long, long time. So the teams like it because they absolutely know it like the back of their hand. They do a lot of their simulation work there. So to have a consistent place where they can test new cars and back-to-back things and compare it to all of their simulation and sim model work, virtual model work, if they can have one circuit that they can use as a test base, it makes a lot of sense for that. But also, as I mentioned in the preview video, it's a great circuit for testing cars because it does test lots of different aspects of a Formula 1 car in terms of the way the different sectors of the lap play out. Huge aerodynamic reliance in the early part of the lap. The last part of the lap, very, very technical, tight, twisty, slow, much more representative of places like Monaco and Hungary, Singapore, whereas the first part of the lap, the middle part of the lap, much more representative of places like Silverstone, Spa, Suzuka perhaps even at times. So a mixture of high speed, low speed and different things that a car needs to be quick around there, which make it a very good test track. There is, I've always thought there's a really great argument of going testing at Paul Ricard, and now that Paul Ricard's on the calendar, it seems to make even more sense. And the reason I say that is that Paul Ricard, fantastic test facility, lots of teams already go testing there and in the past have been testing there for a long, long time. But also it's a circuit that has a huge number of configurations. So you could reset that circuit for different parts of your pre-season testing to almost replicate anything else on the calendar to some extent. So if you want to test tight, twisty, slower parts of a lap, you can do that on for a couple of days, and then if you want to configure it into a much more open high-speed circuit, you can do that. So I think there are now places, and Paul Ricard being a perfect example, where facilities have come on to such an extent that actually there may well be better places to go. People always talk about going further afield, places like Bahrain, Abu Dhabi, again, where you can have various configurations of the circuit and guarantee the weather But there's this conflicting argument where, you know, we're trying to reduce costs. So to keep it in Europe, where all the teams are based, seems to make a lot of sense. So we could stay at Barcelona. There's not really anything wrong with staying at Barcelona, but there's a good argument to say we could end up shifting to somewhere like Paul Ricard as well. On a similar tip, or certainly a tip around the Barcelona circuit, Leif Bolskiff says, do you think the overtaking around the Barcelona track could benefit if they removed turn 14 and 15 and instead used the tarmac that's already there? And is there any work in progress by Liberty Media to change track layouts to improve overtaking? Well, let's answer the second part first. Absolutely, Liberty and Formula One are looking at everything to try and improve the racing. They are looking at every aspect of the cars technically, but also circuits. Should we be going to different circuits, better circuits? Is there any way we can modify certain existing circuits to make improvements? They are definitely looking at that, and some of those things, even places like Melbourne, they have looked in some detail at whether there are changes to the circuit to bring it into that could be done to bring it into line with modern Formula One cars and address some of the issues that we have. So that's definitely going on in the background. With regards to Barcelona, let's have a look at the circuit map, and this is the part of the circuit you're talking about. Turns 14, 15 are the top piece of that picture, the green section. It's that slow, tight, twisty chicane at the end of the lap, the sort of right-angled left of that green part of the circuit. The bit you're talking about that we could potentially use instead is the red section, so the much faster flowing corner around the outside of that would then lead straight way back on round the final corner and onto the start-finish straight. Could we use that? Yes, there's not really any reason we couldn't use that, but would it make it any better for overtaking? I don't think it would. And the reason I say that is that the big braking zone into that final part, the modified part, the green section if you like, at least provides some opportunity. If you don't have a big braking zone, if you've got a fast corner like it would be if we were using that red section at the top of your screen there, if we were using that, then there's not really an overtaking opportunity because everyone's flat out going into that corner. That would be pretty flat out, if not just a tiny little lift, and not really an opportunity for anyone to get by. So the problem you have with using that part is you'd go through there flat out, through that corner, you'd then come onto that tiny little piece of straight, not big enough to overtake on, and then you go through the long, fast, long duration final corner that we have now. Again, very difficult to follow a car through that part of the circuit. Those type of corners where it's reasonably high speed, you're desperate for aerodynamics, desperate for downforce to give you the grip through a corner like that. If you're following a car closely in front looking to make an overtake, we know that with modern Formula One cars you lose all of your downforce when you're close behind a car in front, and therefore on a corner like that where you need downforce most, you're going to have to drop back. You're going to lose performance, you're going to lose grip, you're going to drop back from the car in front, and this is what happens around this circuit. You have to drop back from the car in front around that long final corner. You then get onto the start-finish straight with such a big gap to the car that you were behind going into that corner potentially, that it takes some time before the DRS zone kicks in and you get close enough again to then start thinking about an overtake. Sometimes you can just about do it before the braking zone at the end, but you lose so much time and performance through the long duration corner, and if we had another one of those, I just think it's going to make matters worse. You know, it may not make it any worse than it is now, but I can't see it making it that much better. So I think that's the reason. The other part, incidentally, on that particular picture that you can see on your screen right now is the turn 10 at the bottom of your screen, where you've got green and red. Currently we're using the green section. There's also that flowing, much faster red section that goes around the little bit that says Circuit de Barcelona. That was an old part of the circuit that we potentially could use as well, but I think similar situation, you'd end up with a much faster corner, not much of a braking zone, and actually the braking zone into that really tight turn 10 is a very slow corner, which means it's a big braking zone, it's at the end of a DRS zone, so actually that actually does provide a little overtaking opportunity. I think we saw Sebastian Vettel make a move on somebody, Pierre Gasly perhaps, in the race today, so that's an opportunity to make an overtake, and I think that's the problem. When you swap a slow corner like that with a big braking zone for something much faster and flowing, it doesn't necessarily give the overtaking opportunity that we all perhaps think it might or hope it might. So that's the reason. Neat Wiseman says, how do the restrictions of number of power units used govern or restrict engine upgrades? For example, if I wanted to upgrade my MGU-H, could a team potentially cheat a new unit in and not have it count against the units used rule? Well, no, you can't do that. And the reason you can't do that is each of the power unit elements, once they're used, so you put a power unit in your car, let's say Australia, first race, brand new power unit with each of the elements, turbo, control electronics, internal combustion engine, etc., etc. Each of those elements, once it's used on a circuit on the Friday in practice, is sealed then by the FIA. So each of these serial numbers is logged electronically by the FIA and by the teams, and each of the units is physically sealed by the FIA once it's been inspected. So if you then go away after Australia and you think, okay, we've got a brand new MGU-H here, I want to sneak it into the system, first of all, it's going to have a different serial number, and secondly, the only way you can get that unit into the car is by breaking a seal, which the FIA would then see when they turned up at the next race to find that your power unit now has a slightly different serial number or a different part in that overall unit or combination of elements. So it is closely controlled by the FIA, so you cannot just slip something in and hope nobody notices. That's how it's governed. Now, two people asking a similar question here. Neil Roberts, let's start with him. He says, do you think there'll come a point where Lance Stroll's shortcoming will put pressure on Racing Point to replace him? Who could they replace him with if they did? Or will they start giving him updates before Sergio Perez to make him look better? And on a very similar note, Frumble says, when would Stroll be replaced by Ocon? It's not Stroll's best start, I would say. Well, for both of you, then, in answer to that question or those questions, I would say that it's very unlikely Lance Stroll is going to be replaced in that team. Certainly not this season. His dad owns it. His dad bought that team, and he hasn't bought that team with the help of his fellow investors. He hasn't bought that team purely as a business investment. He's bought that team with a huge consideration for his son, as we all know, to give him a leg up the grid. Yes, he's not had the best of starts to a season. I totally agree with you, but I just cannot see them turfing, the team owner's son out halfway through a season. It's essentially it would be sacking him, wouldn't it? Which they're not going to do. So I think any dreams of Ocon ending up in that car midway through the season must be slim. I think beyond the season, and I don't know what situation there might be in terms of contracts with Lance Stroll, I have no idea on that front, but beyond that, they are a team that are making all the right noises about wanting to be serious about a sustained challenge. And if they are going to be looking to have a long-term serious challenge and assault on the championship and getting into the top four or even beyond, well, as part of that package, you've got to have the best car, you've got to have the best technical expertise, engineering team, management, mechanics, the whole thing, but you've also got to have the best drivers. And at some point they will have to reassess their driver lineup, as every team does periodically, and decide whether they've got the best two people in that car. And if it turns out that Lance Stroll is not the best person to be in that car, they will have a difficult decision to make. And it's going to be very interesting to see, how that is decided and how much emphasis is put on Lance Stroll being the owner's son, and how much is being put on absolute winning desire from within that team. But they're putting resource into the team in terms of bringing upgrades. They are upgrading things like the factory, the facilities around the factory, the people in that team. They're building numbers. They are putting together a proper challenge where they're bringing regular updates to the car. And in theory, that brings performance to the car. So Lance Stroll and his dad are going to want to give Lance the opportunity to benefit from a car that is supposedly improving across the season. So they're not going to get rid of him, certainly not in the short term. Esteban Ocon is going to be sitting on the sidelines looking for another opportunity should one come along, but at the moment I can't see where that might be coming from. Chip Hines says, Elvis, how many nose rigs do the teams bring to a race? Can those be fabricated on site? So he's talking about nose cones and front wing assemblies that you see often built up. You see them on those racks, don't you, outside the front of a garage. How many nose cones do a team bring to a circuit? I would say on average a team would probably bring around 8 full assemblies, so nose cone and wing assemblies. They won't all be of the same spec, they won't all be of the latest spec, but they'll probably have about 8, 4 per car, just ready for emergencies. And the number of current spec units absolutely, totally depends on how new they are, how many of them there are in existence, because quite often with a new upgrade there might only be one each. Sometimes there's only one if it's a real last minute upgrade. And as they start coming through, they'll start cycling them through to get rid of the old versions that are less desired, and within that 8 or so, and that's the top teams. Maybe the smaller teams bring less. We used to take, I think, normally 8. I think most of the big teams would take 4 per car just to be safe. And gradually you'll start filtering in more and more new ones as they start coming off the production line back in the factory. John Stone, what do the little eyelash thingies on the front suspension attachment on the Alfa Romeo do? The eyelash thingies, those little vanes, let's have a look at them. Yeah, these things here, they are essentially flow conditioners. They are there to guide airflow to the right places around the car. Each one of those little vanes generates a vortex. A spinning vortex of air helps to generate a kind of energized flow. And an energized flow, like a spinning vortex, you can much more easily keep control of that. You can direct that and keep its energy flowing in the same direction for longer down the car. So it's just a nice way, a nice easy way. You often see them on the front of side pods for very similar reasons. It's a nice way of keeping flow attached to the surfaces of the car. And in that situation, what they're doing is they're picking up what can be slightly turbulent airflow off the top of the front suspension, also helping to guide the airflow exiting the S-duct, which comes out around that area just at the top of the chassis surface as well, but just helping to guide some of that back along the chassis top, and critically the airflow coming off the front suspension, cleaning that up, sending it back towards the side pods and the inlets, and all of the intricate detailed work that guides the airflow further back around those side pods and on towards the rear of the car. So they're flow conditioners. They're helping to help guide airflow to the areas that they really need it to be. That's what they're there for. Gibran Lakhani says, how on earth can Bottas 2.0 be 0.6 seconds faster than 5-time world champion? Was it Bottas underrated or Hamilton overrated? Okay, well that's qualifying related presumably, because the gap between Bottas and Hamilton in qualifying was 0.6 seconds, a lifetime in Formula 1 terms, but crucial to say in qualifying, not necessarily representative of how quick each of them were. That time came from the very first run in qualifying, and if you think back, Bottas got a very clean run in the first run of Q3. Hamilton, really scrappy first lap in Q3. He got wheel spin coming out of the final corner even before he started the lap, which compromised him, and then I think he was chasing it all the way through, so he had a few moments all the way around the lap and just lost time generally, and that's where he lost the 0.6 of a second. Still good enough, crucially, to put him second. So even with all of those errors and mistakes, he still was faster than any other non-Mercedes car on the grid, which was mind-blowing. But then when it came to the second run, the final run of Q3, when often we see the times really start to tumble, I think the circuit had really lost a bit of time. There was gravel all over turn 13 and turn 14 after Hülkenberg had dragged his front wing through the gravel trap and brought lots of stones back onto the track. And I just think that nobody, or very few people, improved times in that final run. So actually the damage for Hamilton was done in the early part of Q3. Bottas got it right at that moment. Hamilton just didn't. I don't think it's representative of either of their talents or either of their performance over the weekend in general, because as we saw in the race, Hamilton got away quickly, got away lightning fast off the start, and then just dominated and controlled the entire Grand Prix. So I think it's just one of those things. On this particular weekend, Bottas won Saturday, Hamilton won Sunday. It could all flip around. There's nothing really between them in terms of performance at the moment. And that, I think, is going to be the thing that we as fans need to cling on to for some kind of drama and excitement, because the challenge from Ferrari looks to be falling away rapidly. They've got no answer. And actually, Ferrari have got to start really looking over their shoulder more so than worrying about anything Mercedes do right now. So, as I said at the start, ominous really in terms of the performance from Mercedes. And I think what we need to hope for is that there's some kind of drama, whether that's some kind of political drama, some kind of fight between the two drivers in terms of a proper battle. Are they going to fall out? Are they going to be taking each other on? Because it looks like at the moment for the world title. Because when that happens, we all know that things change. The lovey-dovey relationship that we've seen from those two in the past will change, and I don't care what anybody says, what rules of engagement anybody, Toto Wolff or anybody, has laid down. When it comes to it, each one of those drivers will be out for themselves at the sharper end of the season, looking for that World Championship. If it's close between the two, we can potentially expect fireworks, and I think that might be the one thing that keeps this season alive for us. Let's hope so. Matthew Steer says, do you think refueling will ever be brought back to Formula One, and do you think it would improve the racing entertainment? I'm not a big fan of refueling. Not that I'm not, in fact that's not true. I enjoyed refueling. When I was part of the pit stops that had refueling, I was actually on the fueling rig for part of that, so I did enjoy that job. It was quite cool. But in terms of does it improve the racing, I don't think it does. I know it adds another strategic element, and I'm all for that because I love the strategy side of Formula One. It fascinates me. But in terms of on-track action, it didn't really improve things. When we had refueling in the past, all the overtaking was done in the pit lane. It doesn't actually improve any of the on-track entertainment. And I think if we're looking to reset Formula One and move things forward and try to bring back some on-track spice, refueling's not really the way to do that. It could be reintroduced if you want to introduce the strategic element, and as well as modifying the cars and changing the regs to improve the wheel-to-wheel action and the close racing. But I don't think it's an answer in itself. That would be my opinion. Right, finally, this one from Loftin. What can Mercedes possibly have found to win another second in a quali lap compared to Ferrari and Red Bull? One would expect that further improvement would be very difficult, but yet they find a second. Could they continue for years to find seconds? It's a good question, isn't it? I don't think they found a second. I think the biggest thing this year, and this is another debate we can have as to whether it's right or wrong at some point, but tyres are having a huge impact this year, more so than ever before. So I don't necessarily think that Mercedes have brought enough parts onto their car that have given them a second a lap of improvement. I don't necessarily think that's the case. They're obviously improving all the time by small increments, and that's exactly what everybody should be striving to do. But I think actually Ferrari have gone backwards. Particularly this weekend they've gone backwards because things didn't fall for them. Things didn't work the way they expected. If you think back to Ferrari in Barcelona in pre-season testing, they were blisteringly quick, straight out the box. And I've talked about this before. But let's not forget, temperatures were hugely different. Conditions were hugely different. Track temperature was different. Air temperature was different. And what we now know, more so than we did back then because of the experience of the races that we've had so far, is that these tyres, the 2019 tyres, are even more temperature sensitive than we've seen before because we've got a thinner gauge tread. Like we had at a couple of races last year, but now we've got it all the time on these tyres. That means that they are a bit more sensitive to being warmed up. They're also more sensitive to going beyond that, or to go into the overheating zone. And if they drop out of the temperature window, so just below the critical temperature window, they literally lose all grip. And I think track temperature and air temperature have a huge bearing on that. and it can be we could be talking about 5 degrees difference, you know, between being in or out of that zone, and the difference in performance that makes is so much. It's too difficult to describe. It's like driving on ice when they are outside of that temperature window and yet having huge grip when they're in the zone. We've heard the Haas team talking about them struggling like crazy to understand it. So some weekends it works for them, and Barcelona was clearly one of those where they had a great weekend because the tyres were delivering grip. And when the tyres are delivering grip, all the other parts of your car start to work for you. You start to be able to benefit from aerodynamic performance, mechanical grip. All of those things work when the tyres work. If the tyres are not switching on, if they're not working, well then nothing else works, because you can't utilise, you can't get up to speed through corners to benefit from your aero, your downforce. You can't utilise mechanical grip because the frictional grip between the tyre and the road surface just isn't there. So no matter what the car can do, the tyres are just sliding away from you. And when they slide away, then they quickly overheat the surface. Then you get into things like graining. You start to rip off shreds of rubber from the top surface, and you're in a whole world of pain. So the impact of the 2019 tyres, of them either working or not working, should not be underestimated. And I think Ferrari are struggling to understand, not just Ferrari, other teams as well, struggling to understand just what is happening, when it's happening, why it's happening, and what they can do to combat it. It's a real bit of a black art. And clearly in pre-season testing, they didn't have to worry about it because it just worked. They rolled the car out of the truck, they put it on the circuit, and it was blisteringly quick. So they didn't have to go through this problem of trying to understand what wasn't working on the car or trying to work their way out of trouble, because it just worked straight away. I think they were just fine-tuning things in testing rather than having to really dig deep and get perhaps the similar level of understanding of their car that maybe somebody like Mercedes has. So in answer to your question, are they going to continue to find chunks of time like seconds? No, they're not, because the law of diminishing returns says that they're already near the very pinnacle. They're already near perfect. They're operating at an extremely high level, Mercedes, both technically and operationally. So to find the big chunks becomes harder and harder and harder. But what you have to do in any Formula One team is just continue to improve all the time, sometimes by tiny margins. And that's where Mercedes are very strong, and at the moment Ferrari just haven't got any answers. They're not improving, they're not even staying at the same level if we look at the Spanish Grand Prix performance levels that were on display. They need to keep an eye over their shoulder, because if they're not careful, you know, they've even been overtaken by Max Verstappen in the Driver Championship this weekend. Ferrari have no driver inside the top 3 of the Drivers' World Championship. That's a worrying sign, and certainly not a sort of sign that says they aren't championship contenders. So they've got a lot of work to do. They've got to do it quickly if they've got any hope of even disrupting what could be an incredible season for Mercedes-Benz. Anyway, that's that. I'm going to leave the questions there because there were quite a lot, but we've run out of time. Thank you very much for everybody who sent them in, and thank you also to everybody who took part in the giveaway, the Kimi giveaway, because it is time to give this away. Lots and lots and lots of you entered this competition to give away this amazing Kimi print from Carbon Life Diamond series. Joseph Tooth, the artist who did this, courtesy of the gpbox.com. Lots of you entered, very simple to enter. I've got all of the entries here in front of me on the screen. I'm going to, as ever, just start scrolling all the way up, and there are, I haven't counted them, but it seems like hundreds. Scrolling all the way up and down, all the way to the top and back to the bottom. I'm going to stop any second now and just going to see where it has landed. Which one's in the middle? It is Matt Bolian. Let me see if I can see where you're from. I can't see where you're from, but you have just won this epic Kimi print. So I will message you directly, I'll find a way to get in touch, and I will make sure that this is winging its way to you very, very soon. Congratulations, well done. Thank you to all of you who took part, really appreciate it. Lots of you taking the time to have a look, pick out your favourite one of Joseph Tooth's amazing artworks, and tell me why you liked it. So really appreciate the time you all put into that. But Matt Bolian, you are the winner. Well done. This will be coming your way very soon as I can get your address. Thank you to the gpbox.com as ever for supplying these gifts. They have been amazing this year. They've sent me gifts from their suppliers for every single one of the races, the 21 Grand Prix this year. So every race will be giving something away to one of you guys, supplied by the gpbox.com. If you haven't already, can I urge you please to go check out their site, because it's pretty cool. It's full of motorsport gifts, memorabilia, clothing, artwork. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff. If you need a gift for either yourself or someone else, you will find something on their site. So the gpbox.com, go check it out. But that's it for today, guys. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a like. If you have not yet subscribed to this channel, I'd appreciate it if you did. Hit the little button down there and turn your notifications on, and you'll never miss another one. I'll be back very soon. Have a great day. Ta-da.